Okay, everyone, welcome to AP World History. We are going to get started here and just jump right into our first lesson in talking about prehistoric times. Of course, what does that mean? That means the time before we really have written history and kind of organization, and specifically, we're talking about a period that from a few million to about 12,000 years ago. And what we're going to focus on today is talking about the groups that led up to us. In other words, the ancestors of humans, and that's what you're kind of seeing on that illustration below there. Now, the way we have learned about these pre-humans is through fossils. And probably the most important fossil that had ever been discovered in the ancestry of man, if you will, that so far was found in 1974 in modern-day Ethiopia. And specifically, we're talking about the Hadar Valley, as you can see there with the red circle around it. And as you can see, the Hadar Valley is pretty barren, which for digging for fossils is pretty good because you don't have to worry about trees and all that type of stuff, although in general, it's pretty inhospitable. Now, the guys that were leading this expedition in 1974 was an anthropologist from Cleveland, a man by the name of David Johansen. And David Johansen was kind of like the lead guy here. And then another big-time guy with him was archaeologist Tom Gray. And for much of the dig, these guys really weren't finding anything. But on one day, it was kind of at the end of the day, they decided to just go for a walk. Maybe instead of just trying to focus so much on digging, let's kind of just go for a walk, kick some stuff around. And the idea worked because they found this. This is a fossil known as the Australopithecus. This is one of our earliest ancestors, nicknamed Lucy, because the guys were listening when they were, digging, if you will, but really kind of working on the fossil. They were listening to the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and we'll just name her that. Now, this is what the fossils that we have left of it, which for a being that is a few million years ago, that's a pretty complete skeleton. You don't really find things that are much better than that. And when we reconstruct it and use modern technology, on the right is what you have, what we're looking at, and that is an Australopithecus. This is an animal that is 3.2 million years old, and the most important thing is that this is the first hominid that is not an ape, okay? They are not using all fours. They are not exclusively in trees. And the big deal with the Australopithecus is this is the first one of our ape-type ancestors that stood up. I can't stress enough how important it is for us that we do stand up. And that's stuff that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But right now, standing up was the big move. Now, interestingly enough, at this particular time, standing up, not always a good idea. That puts you on two legs when things that want to eat you have four, which means they are faster. Why stand up then? Real simple. Grass. Australopithecus is only about 3.5 feet tall. And about 3.5, 4 million years ago, the area in Africa where this creature was developing changed from forest to grassland. Now, we believe these animals still spend a lot of time in trees based on their physiology, but you had to go from tree to tree. Well, now you can't go from tree to tree because they're so spaced out. You have to walk. Now, you can walk on all fours, but you can't walk through grass on all fours because you can't see. And we really think that's what ended up happening, that you had a shift in the environment that caused this creature to stand up. There is some evidence of tools and living in groups. We don't have really any of the tools, but when I say a tool, that means using an object that's not your hand. So they might pick up a rock to smash something. That's a tool. It's not a handmade tool, but it's still a tool. But this is our first non-ape ancestor. We are standing up. We've got the eyes in the front of our heads, and we're now going to continue to evolve. And what we're evolving into about 2.4 million years ago is this guy here, Homo erectus. All right, we got the big deal. This guy is standing straight up. We've got a bigger brain so you can do more. We've got more advanced tools. And the big deal is this is the first one of the hominids to leave Africa. These are some examples of some tools. On the left is the technique we think you use to make those tools. And on the right, we have these things like this guy right here. And really, believe it or not, these are hunters, these are scrapers. These would be used to scrape off, the fat from animal hides. It would be used to cut up the meat. These are, really just cutters and scrapers. They're not used, we don't have arrowheads, we don't have spears in the sense with stone tips. And of course, no metal. All right, we're just using stone here. Now, as you can see, Homo erectus starts in Africa, around the same place that Lucy was at, and spread all across Europe and southern Asia, getting all the way actually over to Indonesia. So, if it got to Indonesia, I want you, write down in your notebook here, tell me how. How could this creature have possibly gotten to Indonesia? And if you're not sure the area of Indonesia, we're talking about this area right here. Okay. Now, as you can see here, they came across this, which you might know as the Sahara Desert. Well, it's important to know that back then that was actually a jungle, so it was much easier to cross than a desert. But undoubtedly, and perhaps the most important invention, if you will, or innovation in human history is not your phone. I know you think it's your phone, but it's not your phone. It's fire. Fire is a game changer. Fire changed the entire history of the world. And I don't mean fire. What I actually mean is controlled fire, that they can either make fire or harness fire. As you see in the picture, they're putting what looks to be spearheads in the fire, which if you make sure they don't catch on fire, which actually hardens them. But what you can do with fire, guys, is you can cook food. Particularly meat that is cooked in fire will release more nutrients. And those nutrients, guys, will give us bigger brains. And that is the game changer. Bigger brains and the use of fire to create technology. So without fire, all of our metals, all of our advanced technology, it doesn't happen. Yeah, the wheel was important. Yes, computers are important. Yes, everything that you can imagine is important. But without fire, it just doesn't happen. Now, continuing on. Now we're at a period, I want to say, about 100,000 years ago or so. And we have the development of 3 species that were all kind of living together at the same time. You have the Neanderthal, you have the Cro-Magnon, and then you have early Homo sapiens, which aren't us, which I'll explain. It's weird because you live in a world that we just have, quote-unquote, one type of human. But about 100,000 years ago, which really isn't that long, we had at least 3. The Neanderthals were well known, and they're kind of your stereotypical cavemen. These are ancestors that we found that were actually quite large. They were bigger than us. They had lots of tools. They were really designed to be hardy, if you will. Neanderthals lived during the last ice age, which weather was brutal. That's why they were much larger than us. Humans at this point really weren't living much in Europe. We'll come along there a little bit later. But as you can see, they really didn't go that far. We're not sure why they died out. Were they killed by us? Did they run out of food? Did the environment just get too bad? Was there some type of ecological disaster that decimated their population? We just don't know. It seems like they were active first in some areas of Central. If you look at the map here, the blue dots are the oldest dots. So you're looking at Central Europe and then the Middle East. And then it seems to kind of fade away into the point where they're almost driven just to the area around modern-day Spain and Portugal, and then they disappear. But there's an interesting thing I like to bring up about them. The Shanidar Burial. In modern-day Iran, we uncovered a burial site. And as you see on the picture on the right, the body was clearly arranged. Like, people just don't die like that. through fossil evidence, we know that flowers and some tools were placed with this person. Burial makes us believe that perhaps you had some early type of religion, perhaps you had a belief in the afterlife, because there's really no reason to bury the dead. Up to this point, when we find Homo erectus and Australopithecus and some of the ones in between, you don't see arranged burials. We just find them, which means they kind of died and were left there. So Shanidar is hugely important because now we're thinking that you've got the development perhaps of religion, you have the development perhaps of a belief in the afterlife, but these aren't these dull, dim-witted creatures. These are sophisticated people. Another group that's getting really close to us were Cro-Magnons. Cro-Magnons have bigger brains than Neanderthals. They have very sophisticated tools. We're talking about harpoons and fishhooks and sewing needles. We're pretty sure they had clothing from some of the stuff we've been able to find, and we're able to sew it together. We know they have boats. So these guys aren't quite too far from us, but when we look at the fossils, they aren't us. They're still different. As you can see here, they were pretty far ranging. You see all the way from Africa, where pretty much all these guys develop, and we see them in the Middle East, in modern-day India and Central Asia. You've got them all over here, and then you've got this interesting guy way out here, okay? And we've got nothing in between, so it's not like there's a site here, and a site here. So we're not exactly sure how they got from here to there, but nonetheless they did. Now we're looking at these things. You've got spears, you've got axes, and you see here you have a spear, if we look at the spear over here, and it's got a stone tip attached to it. Okay, you've got bone tools over here. Very sophisticated. You've got a bow, which we have found. So early bows and arrow. This, the atoll, this is pretty cool. This is like a spear launcher. So this part right here is the launcher. You set a spear in it, and you can throw it much further than you could throw a regular spear, which is important because, they're hiding things like, you're looking at mammoths and woolly rhinos. You're looking at some pretty big creatures. So it definitely was a challenge. And these guys were clearly up to the task. Again, why did they disappear? I have no idea. One of the most remarkable things we have discovered done by the Cro-Magnons was cave paintings. The most famous is the Lascaux Caves in France, which we have discovered. And as you can see here, they have depictions of huge animals. They have depictions of hunts. But this is, you're looking at higher level thinking here. You're looking at something in which people can express themselves artistically and have a need to do it. It's remarkable. We don't know why they painted it, but they're all over. And these paintings aren't small. If you look at here, this is often referred to as the Cave of the Bulls. I mean, you see the guy, the man that's in the front that looks like he's actually recreating, we see him right here. I mean, look, they got all the way up here. Did they have ladders? I don't know. Did they just climb up there? Was there some steps somewhere? I don't know. But this is remarkable. These are humans taking it to the next level and showing themselves artistically. So you've got some higher order thinking skills. Again, no way are these people dumb cavemen. And then you have a very interesting thing here. These things are called Venus figurines. These are female sculptures, if you will, that have been found everywhere from Spain all the way through India. We're not sure what they are. Perhaps they could be religious in nature. Perhaps they could be part of a fertility rite. But what they tell us is that if you have something that is in Spain and the same basic form of it is all the way in India and everywhere in between, we've got travel. We've got groups that are, maybe they're trading with each other. But what we have is movement. And we have movement and communication. You don't just make this stuff that looks that similar. Okay, the one on the right is about 15,000 years old. So it's not like something just from yesterday. And so some really interesting things that have us trying to understand how advanced these peoples were. And we would see this in later Homo sapien development as well. So now you have something that goes from Cro-Magnon to Homo sapien. So we really do think that these people, if you will, were interacting with each other. Now, did they eventually say, to use the term intermarry, and maybe that's where modern-day Homo sapiens came from, and they all kind of blended? Or was there an early war? Or what happened to the Cro-Magnons? What happened to the Neanderthals? We just don't know. But eventually, 100,000 years ago, we get Homo sapiens. Now, I have Homo sapiens. Sapiens, what does that mean? Okay, the earliest Homo sapiens are from about 100,000 years ago. They do have the largest brains. They're larger than Cro-Magnons. They're larger than Neanderthals. Our brains are slightly larger. We're a little different physically, and so that's why we call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, as opposed to just regular Homo sapiens. But this group started out of Africa around 100,000 years ago. We have found groups of them. We believe they lived in caves and huts, and it is Homo sapiens that get everywhere. Here is your map. So starting about 100,000 years ago, you see they're in Africa, then they move into the Middle East and India, then they go over to Asia, they work their way all the way across, and then they hop over. We'll talk about how they did that a little bit later during the last ice age, and then ultimately working their way down. We have populated every area of the globe, and we are the only creature aside from, say, bacteria and whatnot to do that. Okay, guys, so that's the short of about 3 million years of history. And from this point on, we're going to get to, how did we get from these creatures that just kind of lived in some huts and wandered around to what we have today? Now, what I want you to do is answer one question in your notebook for me, and it's simply this. Out of all the things that I discussed, what do you find to be the most remarkable? What was like the one thing that you didn't know, or the one thing that kind of surprised you to learn about? And that's something we're going to talk about in class tomorrow. Okay, so thanks for listening. And if you need to start it over, feel free. See you guys tomorrow.